Hey, sis, why didn't you come to mom's funeral? What? I can't believe my own sister wouldn't show up for our mother's funeral. You're so cold-hearted. It's just awful. How could you do something like that? No decent person would. The call from my sister left me speechless. Mom had passed away 3 years ago, and we'd already had the funeral. I had no idea what she was talking about. I'm married now, raising a family. My husband and I both work, but we make sure to shower our kids with extra love and attention. He's supportive in every way, from housework to parenting, and I feel so proud of the life we've built together. I've always been determined to give my children a happy home, one they'll never question like I did when I was their age. My childhood was complicated. My parents divorced when I was in elementary school because of my mom's affair, a secret that came out because I told my dad. Everyone expects children to side with their mother, but that wasn't the case for me. My mom was far from the loving figure you'd imagine. I don't have any memories of her affection, not for me. Anyway, she only had that for my younger sister. It felt like even simple household chores were too much of a burden for her, so they became my responsibility, more of an obligation than a choice. After I exposed her affair, my mom's resentment toward me grew. She despised me for betraying her, and I was left with deep emotional and physical scars from her cruelty. When the divorce was finalized, she took my sister and left. Even so, my dad and grandparents made sure I could still see my sister regularly, at least for a while. By the time I reached middle school, the visits became less frequent. I thought it was just the natural drift of adulthood, but it turned out my sister was intentionally avoiding me. I confronted her after she turned down a few attempts to meet up. That's when she told me what our mom had said. In her eyes, I was the reason our family fell apart. She believed I was a traitor. Worse, she feared that if she stayed close to me, she'd be abandoned next. She couldn't bear to meet with me anymore, not without risking our mother's wrath. She wanted me to stop talking about it. I explained that our mom was the one who broke up the family by cheating on our dad. My sister knew about the affair too, but I was the one who told him. Even though she understood this, she still blamed me, saying I was the traitor because she had to live with our mom. She wouldn't listen, insisting it was my fault for not staying quiet and pretending everything was fine. While all this was happening, my dad got remarried, and I gained a stepmother. It felt strange at first, but my stepmother tried hard to be a good mother to me. Seeing how much effort she put in, I decided to embrace my new family and appreciate her. I stopped reaching out to my sister, and before long, we lost contact completely. I didn't feel any attachment to my biological mother, who had only ever cared about my sister. I was able to go to college and eventually found a job. Just when I was ready to repay my dad and stepmother for everything they did for me, my dad passed away in an accident. Even though we hadn't been close, I let my sister know that our dad had died, but instead of offering any sympathy, she just said, "Serves him right," and laughed. I expected her and my mom to come to the funeral, but they never showed up. Yet, when it was time to talk about my dad's inheritance, they both appeared out of nowhere. Everyone was shocked by how they looked, wearing flashy clothes and heavy makeup. They barely looked like the people I remembered. It seemed they enjoyed dressing up like that now. They complained that they weren't told about the inheritance meeting date and had to keep checking every day. My mom had been hanging around, hoping to join in on the inheritance discussion. I thought it would have been better if she had just come to the funeral instead. The inheritance talk was scheduled right after the funeral, so it wasn't hard to figure out. During the meeting, my mom said, "Because of you, my poor daughter suffered. You'll make sure we get a fair share, right?" Even though my parents were divorced and lived apart, my sister and I still had the right to inherit from our father. I had no plans to refuse that. However, my father didn't have a large estate, and it wasn't enough to be split among everyone. I could earn my own money, and my stepmother was still young and able to continue working. She planned to keep working for a while, so even if I gave my father's inheritance to my biological mother, my stepmother wouldn't face any financial hardship. I didn't want any more conflict, so I gave up my claim to the inheritance. My mother, however, began mocking my father, calling him stupid for making such a big deal out of her affair and pushing for a divorce. She said she only agreed to it because he was small-minded. My sister chimed in, saying it wasn't our dad who left mom, but the other way around, mocking me for living with him. They both laughed, insulting my father even though he had passed away. My sister even took a shot at me, saying it was pathetic I was raised by a man who got dumped, and that I looked older than my own mother. She ridiculed me for not having a boyfriend, saying I wasn't a real woman if I couldn't attract a man. Their cruelty stung, But I calmly asked them not to speak ill of our father, especially now that he was gone. That only provoked them more, and they accused me of being the root of all the family's problems. After a heated argument, my mother and sister told me never to contact them again and stormed out. Surprisingly, I didn't feel anger or disappointment, I just felt empty. In that moment, they were erased from my life. After they left, there was a long silence in the room, broken only when someone coughed, bringing me back to reality. The inheritance was quietly divided after that. Years later, my stepmother inherited the house my father had left behind, and I stayed there with her. Even though I was an adult, she continued to try to be a mother to me, and her support meant the world. But eventually, she became ill and had to be hospitalized. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't ask you to live with me just so you could take care of me." "I know," I replied, "but even if we lived separately, I'd still take care of you, don't worry." I visited her in the hospital during my breaks from work, wanting to be there for her as much as possible. I didn't want to feel the regret I had after my father passed away. I was determined to spend as much time with her as I could, even if it was more for my own peace of mind. During this difficult time, one person stood by me, my partner. Before we found out about my stepmother's illness, we had been talking about marriage. When the diagnosis came, I asked if we could delay it, but he suggested we go through with it to bring some comfort to my stepmother. His support was everything I needed. When the time was right, I introduced him to my stepmother. "I'm looking forward to the three of us living together," he told her, offering her the reassurance she needed. "He's a wonderful man. I have to make sure I see you in your wedding dress, for your father's sake too," my stepmother said with a smile. It seemed to be her greatest joy, and she ended up living longer than the doctors initially expected. But a few days after my wedding, she passed away, joining my father. My stepmother was wealthy, and I inherited a large sum of money. 3 years later, with what she left behind, I was able to build a happy family. However, from the start of our marriage, my husband and I had decided to live within our means and not rely on the inheritance, so we both continued working. One day, like usual, I was at work when I received a call from an unknown number on my personal phone. Assuming it was a sales call, I ignored it, but the number kept calling over and over. Thinking it might be a mistake, I finally answered at the end of the day. It was my sister, the one I had cut ties with. "Finally, why didn't you come?" "Come where? What are you talking about?" I asked, confused. "How could you forget our mother's funeral?" she cried, her voice heavy with tears. "What are you talking about? Mom's funeral was 3 years ago," I replied, completely puzzled. There was a brief pause, then she spoke angrily. "Oh, maybe your stepmother died too. I'm talking about our real mother. Calling someone you're not even related to mother is disgusting." Her words irritated me, but I brushed it off, realizing she must be in shock from losing her mother. To me, though, my real mother was my stepmother. She had married my dad and taken on the role of a mother to me, a middle schooler at the time, practically overnight. I didn't fully appreciate her efforts until I had a family of my own. Raising a child without a blood connection, like through adoption, is challenging for many, but my stepmother did it without hesitation. Becoming a mother to a middle schooler all of a sudden must have been incredibly difficult for her. When I think about everything she did for me, I feel nothing but gratitude. I owe so much to her, and she is the mother I aspire to be. Blood doesn't define family. The biological mother my sister referred to never even acknowledged me. So, when I think of mother, I think of my stepmother, not the woman who gave birth to me. Realizing what my sister had meant, I answered calmly, "Oh, I see." I heard banging or stomping on the other end of the line, followed by her furious voice. "What's with that indifferent attitude? The funeral is over, and you didn't even come. It's awful not to attend your own mother's funeral. You're so cold-blooded." Even though she had a point, my sister hadn't shown up at our father's funeral either. Our father, who passed away, loved both my sister and me equally. In fact, I think he was far more caring than our mother. Neither my birth mother nor my sister attended his funeral, yet they took his inheritance and insulted him afterward. If you ask me, they are the ones who seem heartless. My sister called me indifferent, but I reminded her, "Well, we're practically strangers now, aren't we? You didn't even come to Dad's funeral, but still interfered with the inheritance. Weren't you the one who told me never to contact you again? And I just found out about our mother's death now." After a brief pause, she said softly, "Oh, I forgot. I meant to tell you about the funeral." "Well, I'm glad you remembered, but I'm renouncing any inheritance from our mother, so do whatever you want with it." With that, I hung up. A few days later, my sister called again. Help me, Katie. Mom was apparently hinting at marriage to several men. Isn't that like marriage fraud? They're threatening to sue me if I don't pay compensation. Then just pay them, I replied. If I could, I wouldn't be calling you. It's not just one or two men, and some of them seem pretty dangerous. That's tough, I said, but remember, you're the one who told me not to contact you. Plus, you already knew Mom had a history with men. She cheated on Dad when he was alive, and it wasn't just one affair. If it had only been one person, maybe our father could have forgiven her, thinking it was just a mistake, but she had multiple affairs, and only our father truly knew the depth of her betrayals. I think that's why he tried to adopt you several times through a lawyer, but you didn't want to leave Mom. You chose to stay with her, even though you saw how irresponsible she was. My sister struggled to respond, muttering, well, I continued, you called me a traitor, remember? I don't need a sister who sees me that way. You were the one who declared us strangers first, so don't come around now acting like family. It's a nuisance. Don't ever contact me again, we're strangers. After all. I hung up without waiting for her response, blocked her number, and returned to my home where my family was waiting for me. Later, I received a call from my biological mother's relatives. They apologized for the way my mother and sister had treated me, but for me, it was already over. I decided to listen to what my relatives had to say. They remembered how poorly my mom treated me and were shocked that she had the nerve to go after my father's inheritance after we had cut ties. They apologized for letting her visit me while I was still grieving, but I assured them that it was all in the past. Next, they told me about my sister. Apparently, she was just as reckless with men as our mother had been. Ever since she came back, the relatives had warned her that she would face consequences if she didn't change her behavior. Instead of listening, my sister became exactly like our mother, and the family could no longer control her actions. Mom got involved with bad men, and my sister was dragged into illegal activities because of it. Feeling trapped, my sister started dating multiple men at once, leading to several heated confrontations. The relatives finally told her they would cut ties if she didn't turn her life around. When our mother died, they followed through with that decision since my sister was an adult. Right after our mother's funeral, there was another confrontation, and since then, no one has known where my sister went. The relatives advised me not to get involved with her anymore. I hadn't planned on it anyway, but I couldn't help feeling a little sorry for her. Maybe there was some sympathy to be found in the fact that she got pulled into criminal activities. Still, there must have been ways for her to make things right. If she didn't, that's on her. That's what I decided after the call ended. As I hung up, I heard my husband and children laughing in the next room. I felt a strong need to protect the family I had now, and I resolved to live my life using my mother and sister as examples of what not to become.